As mayor, how will you address the problem of persistent and aggressive panhandling?
It's a difficult situation. The city has an ordinance on the books that addresses that in certain ways with enforcement of people being cited for it. There are contending views about who's in fact doing the aggressive panhandling. There's some who contend that there are people on the street who really are in need, and I would be in favor of providing the social network, the social services that are required to address those needs. Part of the process was to put the meters on the street, to put the money in the meters and direct people to the social agencies that provide the basic services that they need. The other part of that is that there are professional, aggressive panhandlers on the street who are neither needy nor homeless. And to the extent that that is in fact the case, we need to do everything within our power to make sure that those people are off the street. I would, again, do everything I could to develop a social network to address the needs of those homeless and others who really are in need of social services, and they need some hand up, hand out to be helped. And I would deal very severely with those who are simply out there to harass.
I feel that one of the things that Mayor Franklin has done that's been commendable has been her outreach and her establishment of the Gateway Center. The Pine Street facility, the homeless task force, didn't really participate, didn't gain the mayor's support, and she therefore froze funding to that facility. I was concerned to read that you would restore funding to that facility. Mm-hmm. That would be contrary to the current direction of city government. Can you tell me more about that? I
went to the Pine Street, Peachtree Street facility. There are just under 400, 500 beds in that facility. I happened to run into a former commissioner of the city of Atlanta in that shelter. And he talked about living in Virginia Highlands until he lost his job. And I happened to be there in the afternoon when they were assigning beds for that facility, and he was at the front of the line to get one. So he wasn't just passing through, he was there being served. I was also taken through that facility by a young man who was a former drug addict and trafficker, who talked about how it took him longer than what the Gateway would have permitted to get his act together. And so given where he is today, I would be very sorry to have seen him lost by virtue of being kicked out of a facility that simply didn't allow him the time he needed to address his problem. So yes, I think that people have different needs, and my commitment would be to, in a cost-efficient, effective way, to address the needs as they exist, and they may not comply with some artificial timetable.
You mentioned earlier that people are cited for panhandling in downtown, and actually that's not accurate. Our mayor expended a lot of our business community's capital passing a panhandling ordinance that the law department recommended the police department not enforce. Mm-hmm. How will you address creating a tool that our officers can use to create a more civil atmosphere in our city?
Part of the problem with police time is, one, lack of officers on the street, and secondly, victims not wanting to prosecute. And so that's been a deterrent to some of the enforcement that's been in place. You set up the enforcement system, and then you simply abide by the rules. You simply abide by the rules. You insist, you have the performance matrix in place with respect to that ordinance, as with respect to any other performance element of your police force or your public employees, and you simply insist that they abide by the rules.
Thank you for acknowledging that you'd seen the video about the deplorable treatment of our catastrophically disabled officers. As mayor, what would you do to make sure that this treatment or that no retaliation occurs to these officers?
I just simply insist that there be no retaliation, and if there is, come talk to me and we'll deal with it. From what I have learned about that situation, it has not always been that way. It seems that it's within the last couple of years that the difficulties have developed. What concerns me is the allegation that, notwithstanding the city's stringent defense of these actions or delay in paying these claims, that they ultimately end up being paid. Well, it doesn't make any sense to me to be spending a lot of money on attorney's fees to make claims that you're going to pay ultimately anyhow. One rationale has been offered for that is that the city's in cash poor position, or other cities have been, and that's been one of the reasons that they've been delaying. I am not in the business of wasting taxpayers' money. To the extent that we owe the money, we ought to pay it. We ought to, for the people who are in the street, who are trying to protect us. We ought to give them the support they need in this very, very difficult time in their lives, and especially when it has the impact on morale that we hear police officers on the street say that it has on them today. So I would be in favor of making sure that we evaluate the claims in a responsible way, but that we not protract the payment unnecessarily.
And thank you for acknowledging that police morale is your number 3 priority earlier. On a different subject, downtown is a very complex array of jurisdictions of police services: Georgia State Patrol, Georgia State Police, the Georgia Tech Police, the Downtown Improvement District, Atlanta Police. How would you as mayor make that more efficient and more effective for the people who live and work here?
You simply coordinate, create collaboration between them. There is a lot of technology that's being used downtown today from private businesses that people are concerned about Uncle listening and seeing and all that, but there's a good bit of that's going on already. And so what you do is you bring those agencies together. You have equipment that allows them to communicate across jurisdictions, and then you make sure that they do communication. That is part of what's been done, for instance, with the panhandling. There's a coordination that's going on between the ambassador force and the private security forces that monitor what's happening at different locations, and as people move, they then get, the information gets relayed to the next authority, whether it be the ambassador force or the Atlanta police or another private property owner. So you would bring those various agencies together, and you'd find the ways that allows them to deliver their services in the most efficient, cost-effective fashion. Duplication doesn't serve anybody very well, and perhaps in doing that, we'll find that we have expenditures that we don't need to be making, and to the extent that we can save businesses or residents or the government, the city, money by not having that duplication of services, then I'd be in favor of that, and I'd push for that.
Great. One example of private-public cooperation is the Atlanta Police Foundation that Mayor Franklin was instrumental in establishing some years ago. What level of transparency do you feel like we should have regarding the Atlanta Police Foundation and its salaries, its programs?
To the extent that it's a nonprofit entity and it's being supported by public dollars, then we ought to have complete transparency.
Good answer. That's brief, but one of the concerns we have about that private and public partnership is performance. Our police officers have expressed dissatisfaction with the Crime Stoppers program, that there's no current criminals posted on it, that none of the Georgia Tech crimes or none of the recent crimes in our city are posted. And how would you as mayor hold a private operation accountable for public service delivery?
As mayor, I might not be able to do that. Again, we're talking about collaboration. The mayor has certain authorities, and to the extent that there's an opportunity for me to be involved directly by virtue of the city's charter and directing what happens, and I'd be more than happy to do that. But to the extent that it's beyond my purview, I can only use the bullet pulpit of the office and my powers of persuasion to get people to cooperate in ways that we'd like them to do that.
Thank you. Our city council, many of our citizens have been dissatisfied with service or response from the police department, and they've been calling our city council members to serve as ombudsmen or responders. Do you think that's an appropriate role of city council, to be in a complaint department role?
Citizens are entitled to complain to anybody in government if they're getting poor services. Oftentimes, the city council members will have more direct contact with the public because of the way it's set up than a lot of other people in government, the department heads or even the mayor. I think it's very appropriate for that to happen. I think that they ought to complain to the extent that they're not happy, and they ought to hold their city council members accountable in the same way they hold the mayor accountable.